Thanks for choosing this free Anfield Index podcast. If you'd prefer to listen to this or any of our other shows without adverts, then now's the time to check out Anfield Index Pro. With AEye Pro, you can supercharge your entire listening experience. You'll not only get all of our podcasts without the ads, but you'll have them far faster with our quick publish feature available exclusively for subscribers. AEye Pro also puts you in the heart of our sound studio, with an option to listen to many of our shows live and interact with the podcasters in real time as the shows are recording. Upgrading couldn't be easier. AEye Pro is available on all popular podcast platforms, and we have our own apps for Apple and Android. Just head on over to AnfieldIndexPro.com and get started today.
Hello and welcome to AEye Scouted on Anfield Index Pro. I'm Dave Hendrick, joined as always by Mr. Karl Matchett and our special guest, Mr. Guy Drinkle. First of all, Karl, how are you?
Furious you didn't give me enough time to make a tea for this podcast.
I told you to make a tea. This is an outrageous accusation and I reject it with contempt. Guy, you heard me. I told him, make a cup of tea. And he said, no, water will do. Playing the martyr here, these big J journalists.
Very true.
He's just upset, I think, because he is running away with the lateness chart this year. And is disgusted by the fact that I have only accumulated 5 minutes of lateness so far to his 39. And as you will attest, Guy, his could be like 2 hours and 39 because he has frequently just held us up.
He made it that we brought Unai Emery Watch into Scouted. That's his punishment for them.
Exactly. There's where we'll start. Karl, completely off topic. Unai Emery, 2 wins from 2 in the Premier League. Beats mighty Manchester United under Eric Ten Hag and
expected, yeah.
And Brighton, who are doing very, very well this season under, especially now since De Zerbi took over and has found a bit of a formula. Early feeling on Unai?
New manager bounce, isn't it? There's nothing to do with Unai whatsoever. A 1-goal win at home is like always completely expected. That's like, bottom line principle of Unai 101. So the fact that they won 3-1, that's your extra new manager bounce kind of bit. And then away from home, would thoroughly have expected a 1-1 draw at Brighton, for example. So they got a penalty. That was, a bit of a changeable scenario sort of thing. And then I didn't actually watch the game, I must admit, but I had a look back. And I think what we can see here is from 79 minutes onwards, there was a bit of a theme as to how Villa saw out the victory. I'll just quickly read through these lines of match instances from the 79th minute onwards. Matty Cash, yellow card. 80 minutes, Leon Bailey, yellow card. 84 minutes, Ashley Young, yellow card. 85 minutes, Boubacar Kamara, yellow card. 97 minutes, Emilio Martinez, yellow card. John McGinn, 97 minutes, yellow card. And in amongst all that lot as well, 82 minutes Villa sub, 83 minutes Villa sub, 83 minutes Villa sub. Is there in any way at all this is a possibility that they were trying to shithouse their way?
What I love is if you look at the Villa team that started, everybody bar Ezri Konsa was either booked or substituted. And 2 of the subs who came on were also booked. Villa picked up 7 yellow cards and made 5 subs in the game, all just to waste time. Magnificent stuff. And yet, the biggest crime committed in that game was Luca Digne just deciding to kick through Solly March in his own penalty area, and no penalty was awarded. Villa were quite lucky to get away with the win there. Danny Ings with probably the 2 worst goals I've seen all season. The penalty is a shocker, and if Sanchez just stands up, he saves it. And the second goal, if Sanchez gets down his hands and knees and blows at the ball, he probably stops it. More proof to my theory that he just isn't very good. And yet somehow he's in the Spain squad for the World Cup, and that allows me to transition nicely into the topic of this podcast, which is myself, Karl and Guy are going to pick 5 players that we think people should keep an eye on for this competition, and 2 players that we think Liverpool should keep an eye on during this competition. So we're going to pick a goalkeeper, a defender, a centre mid, a winger wide forward, and a centre forward in general, and then 2 players of our choice for Liverpool to keep an eye on that might suit upcoming or current needs in the Liverpool team. We are not going to talk about Enzo Fernandez or Moises Caicedo because they have been obviously talked about quite frequently. Everybody knows that they would be my preference for us to sign to solve our midfield woes. So let's start with goalkeeper, Karl. Who do you have as the goalkeeper you think people should keep an eye on in this competition?
Right, I've got a big name goalkeeper, but for not necessarily a positive reason. And I've gone for Hugo Lloris. Now, a bit of a weird one, but I picked France to presume already out by the time you're listening to this. And Hugo Lloris is obviously their captain. He's the World Cup winner with them from 4 years ago. He's like an immovable part of the furniture, basically, well over a century of caps, and even more so now, considering Mike Maignan, the number 2, is out injured. So, why Lloris? First of all, he's been absolutely horrible for a lot of this season. Really, really poor form. Secondly, most recent game against Leeds, even worse than his recent poor form. Absolutely terrible. I thought both him and Illan Meslier in that game were absolutely rubbish. And going into the tournament in the form that he is at the minute, there are only really a couple of reasons why France shouldn't be considered very, very big favourites for the World Cup. We've gone over Didier Deschamps and some of the decisions he makes at times. I think central midfield is a little bit light maybe compared to the rest of the team in the depth. And thirdly, I think is Lloris. Now, he's obviously, on his day, a very, very good goalkeeper, and he's been at the top end of the game for a long, long time, so no concerns over, generally being shit or anything like that. But he's not in a good moment, I don't think. And he needs to be if France are to go all the way. So he needs to really, really step up his performance level. France need him to be just generally not culpable for quite simple goals in the way that he has been for Tottenham more than once this season. And I think he is one of the only other parts of the team that could prevent them going all the way.
I think that's a great shout. I watched that game at the weekend and he was awful. Meslier, I don't really understand Illan Meslier. I'm not sure how he's a starting goalkeeper for a Premier League team still, because he just, there's obviously a lot of talent there and he's very, very young, but he makes so many mistakes. And I think it wasn't picked up on as much at the weekend because Lloris made just as many. He has been poor this season, Hugo Lloris, and I don't think he was particularly good last season. I was surprised Spurs gave him a contract extension because if it were me, I'd have been thanking him for his service and sending him on home because I just think he's finished. It speaks to Deschamps that he's still first choice. Now, obviously with Magnan's injury, he, even a second choice, would be starting in this tournament had Deschamps done the right thing a few years ago, but he hasn't, and they'll have to rely on him. I think it's a good pick, and I see why you went that way, because he could be the big weak link in that team. Guy, who have you got as your goalkeeper? I think I know, but let the people know.
You obviously expect me to say Ochoa because that's the correct answer, but it's not Ochoa because
I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed.
Ochoa will obviously get the Golden Gloves of the competition, but I've gone with Diogo Costa from Portugal because I assume, if he gets picked, is probably the first question mark. But Rui Patricio's crap. Jose Sarr has an error in him.
Yeah,
and I want to see how this lad's developed since his match fixing game against us.
It's a strange thing. He put in one of the worst performances I've ever seen by a goalkeeper when he played against us. And then about 2 months later, I saw a story that Manchester United were preparing to bid 40 million for him.
Yeah, he seems to be the next big one to buy, doesn't he?
Yeah, and I just assumed it was somebody else and not the fella that had played against us. And was actually shocked to find out it was the same fellow who played against us. Now, he strikes me in the same way that Robert Sanchez strikes me. that he's got talent. He's a big unit. He is error prone though. But what he does is he's really good with his feet. Like, he's not quite Ederson level, but he's probably the next closest thing. And Ederson is, in my opinion, wildly overrated because he's great with his feet. I don't think he's a particularly wonderful goalkeeper, but I think the same is true of Costa, of Sanchez, and of a few others. I think David Raya is another one that's become vastly overrated because he's good with his feet. I think he's probably better than Sanchez, but still don't think he's great. Karl, thoughts on Diogo Costa?
I think it is still up for debate as to whether he starts or not. And I think that there's probably a lot to be said for Fernando Santos being one of the managers at the World Cup who are loyal to a fault, let's say, over certain players. So I wouldn't actually be surprised to see a goalkeeping change during the competition either. I think that there's big question marks over all of them.
Yeah, I agree. We highlighted Jose Sa when Wolves signed him as not a very good signing, and he, to his credit, had an unbelievably good season last year. Did start to make some errors towards the tail end of it, but this season has been quite error prone and maybe is being found out a little bit.
So I did address this at the time, and he definitely was better than I expected him to in terms of his, his handling and that kind of thing. But last season, at the beginning of the campaign, he was unbelievably protected by that Wolves defence. They were set up to be so deep and so compact, and like they were bottom of the Premier League charts, which is a good thing in this regard in terms of conceding shooting chances from inside the penalty box, from conceding high-value chances which were not one-on-ones, loads of things like this. That was a really, really solid start that Lage had made at the time in terms of setting the team up to be difficult to beat. Obviously, he never addressed the thing at the other end of the pitch, and that's ultimately what cost him. But as good as Sa was in terms of like a few quite big one-on-one stops that he made and that sort of thing, he was not like put under constant, relentless pressure. He was not. I don't think he was as good as for a little while, this narrative was sort of built around him because he had the best goals against him record, and he'd kept clean sheets across that first third of the season. And so I maintain this was a big part of the defensive structure that they had at that point.
I do think that's very fair. And I do remember you highlighting, just as we were coming into December of last season, I remember you highlighting that Wolves had a fairly favourable schedule, and obviously how they'd played, and they had a much tougher run of games coming up. And they ended up obviously having quite a dip in form, and they did concede quite a few soft goals. Now, he got away with some of the blame, but I think we're just in this moment where when players go to a club, they're given a lot of rope and mistakes are overlooked. Like right now, we're seeing it with the likes of Martinez and Saliba. Saliba's made a couple of very big mistakes, but yet he's still probably been one of the better centre-backs in the league, so he's getting Van Dijk comparisons. Martinez has had 4 or 5 absolute stinkers, but he is getting praise galore because the mistakes have been overlooked. I think the same was true last season with Sa and with Aaron Ramsdale as well, where they had a couple of big saves that were, played endlessly. And I think by the end of the season, they had sort of evened out to where you expected them to be. But people remembered kind of the flashy moments and things like that. So, yeah, the Portuguese goalkeeping situation's a bit odd. I'd like to see Costa get an opportunity and develop and see what he can do. Because I do think in time that could be a really special team. As I mentioned on the last pod, I think once the show pony up front retires or just gets put out of the team for whatever reason, I think they're going to be much better off. My goalkeeper is someone that I've been banging the drum for about 2 years now and calling on every Premier League team in need of a goalkeeper to sign, and that is Predrag Rajkovic of Serbia. Moved to Mallorca in the summer. Admittedly, I've not watched a whole lot of Mallorca this season, but he really, really impressed me for Reims. My assumption is he will be the starting goalkeeper over Dimitrovic and Vanja Milinkovic-Savic, who's very much the third choice. I think he's the the first choice, and I think he's part of why I have belief that this Serbia team can go quite a long way in the tournament.
I mean, Serbia, I think we might have built them up to, heights never seen before in that country's relatively short footballing history, to be fair. So they're going to need a few key players to be probably at the very, very top of their game across a sustained period for them to achieve what we think will be the case. One thing I would say for the Serbia team as a whole, but the goalkeeper role especially, is the defence is built to protect them as well. Like, they will benefit enormously from having a really good structure, a very, very cohesive team, which is used to playing in the way that they will play at the tournament. All of that is really, really important. I assume, same as you, that Rajkovic is going to start ahead of Dimitrovic, simply based on the fact that Rajkovic is obviously first choice, and Dimitrovic less so, because he's obviously up against Buna quite a lot of the time and will play. So Dimitrovic not having as much game time, I think, will probably cost him, even though he's actually, I think, been given the number 1 shirt. Obviously not necessarily anything that makes that much difference. But again, similar to Portugal, this might be one where they decide to make a change. But maybe if you get that shirt at the beginning and you're in a team who is performing well as we expect them to, this is your big shot. This is your one.
Yeah, it's definitely possible that he doesn't get on the pitch, but he is the more capped of the two, despite being 3 years younger. So I'm just hopeful that he can carry on, because I do think he's a very, very good goalkeeper. And if we were looking for a backup for Alisson, I think he's actually too good to be a backup, but I actually think he'd be perfect. He was very much first choice for Serbia last year. Remains to be seen if that carries on. Right then, what about defender? Guy, I'll go to you first on this one.
I've gone for Schlotterbeck of Dortmund and Germany. Everyone seemed to love the move when he went to Dortmund, but Dortmund seemed to be cursed. They can't defend it. But he seems to be one of the big names in terms of the next crop of centre-backs, so it'll be interesting to see him in a, hopefully, for Germany's sake, more competent team than Dortmund. And I'm guessing it'll be him and Rudiger as a pair, which could work or could be disastrous, because Rudiger's week to week, whether he's good or bad. But yeah, I went for Schlotterbeck because, well, I don't watch the Bundesliga because who can be asked, but the way he's talked about, I want to see if he's actually part of the next crop.
Yeah, I like him. Now, Dortmund this season might be a bit as bad in terms of defensive structure as you'll see among any elite team in Europe. But even in that, I think he has done relatively well. Karl, what's your thoughts on Nico Schlotterbeck?
Are you that person who has everything? The coolest merch and those must-have fan threads? Well, over at our Anfield Index shop, we've gone that extra mile when it comes to pimping up your Liverpool collection. From our popular range of bespoke design t-shirts, sweaters, hoodies and hats, to our signature edition mugs, prints and coasters, all provided with fast worldwide shipping. We have something for every red. We also stock official LFC merchandise and are licensed with the Premier League and UEFA to sell official iron-on shirt badges and sleeve patches. As a listener to this podcast, you can get 10% off everything with coupon code AEyePro10. Just head over to AnfieldIndex.shop or find us on Etsy by searching for Anfield Index.
Basically, your sentence there at the end, I think he's done relatively well considering the team he's in. Again, another managerial change for them very early on this season, involved a systemic change, involved a change in what they want from the centre-backs, who were very, very split and playing out before. It's a little bit tighter now. It's not quite as reliant on the centre-mids coming in to take the ball from them. So Schlotterbeck, all the things that he was good at playing left of a three especially, was bringing the ball out into that sort of deeper midfield area, playing nice little link passes with his wing-back beforehand. So I think that they're getting a little bit more from him now, that the things that he's good at. I think that he is one of the more consistent performers that they had. Again, change of partnerships. They've been still trying to play Hummels when he's fit. Sula's been in and out through injury again. So it's not easy being a defender at Dortmund at the best of times over the last 4 or 5 years. This year, I think they had quite a false position early on as well, to be honest. They were sort of third with fourth, and Union and Freiburg were still ahead of them, which showed that Dortmund were doing better than Bayern, but worse than two teams who weren't expected to be fighting for the title anyway, which kind of summed up what the Bundesliga was very, very early on. So not a problem, I think, to have him in your team. He's not the leader that Germany and Dortmund need at the minute, I think. That's probably one of the things that they lack defensively, Dortmund. But as the second defender, let's say, if you can eventually fix that leader at the back role, I think he's a really good one to have long term.
PK to Puyol type situation.
Yeah, he needs a grown up next to him, and unfortunately, Mats Hummels, when he plays, can be the leader and the organizer. But Mats Hummels is awful now. He's so far past his best. He just looks like a different player. If I was Spurs playing a back three, I probably would be all over Nico Schlotterbeck. Because I think he'd be ideal on the left side of a back three, but I do very much like him. Karl, who's your defender?
My defender, I'm going to cheat here, I'm afraid, because my defender is potentially one of about four. So I'm going with Uruguay's centre-back as my one to watch. So normally the starter would be Ronald Araujo, obviously. They have named him in the squad. They are hopeful that he will play, I quote, at least one game in the group stage, which is not the most ringing endorsement of fitness I've ever heard in my life. So I'm assuming it's going to be Jimenez starting with Godin as much as possible, but if he can't play back-to-back games, maybe Seb Coates comes in as well.
Yes, let's go.
Yeah, exactly. So Seb Coates obviously plays a very, very big role now for Sporting. He is a regular performer, deep role, all the things that you would expect from a Uruguayan defender. So all three of us actually think Uruguay are going through some further than others. But for that to be the case, this being a team which all the things that we used to see from Uruguay at the major tournaments in terms of really hard working, very aggressive, really good shape, all those things still apply. Obviously, it's a bit of a different playing style and even midfield alignment right now. And sometimes they play with a back three, so we could get Jimenez, Godin and Coates all playing early on in the tournament. But basically, whoever takes Araujo's spot in terms of being the slightly more mobile and slightly better at playing out and the recovery runs most of all, that is going to be super important for them because they do play a little bit higher than they used to. Araujo is obviously one of the ones who allows them to do that because Godin is 700 years old at this point.
I will not have Diego Godin slander on this podcast.
Oh no, there's nothing but respect. The fact that you can go to a World Cup age 700 is exceptional.
At least we can slag off Sol because did he make it in the squad?
No,
you can slag off him. Yeah.
Jimenez, I think, is going to be key as long as they can, sellotape him and staple him back together match to match.
That's the thing that concerns me for Uruguay. Jimenez, injury prone. Godin, ancient. Araujo coming off thigh surgery, which initially was meant to keep him out to January, February. And then Seb Coates, who has been absolutely outstanding for Sporting. But he plays in the middle of a back three with pace either side of him for them. And that's not something that Uruguay can really offer. Jimenez, if he tries to sprint, is likely to tear both hamstrings. Araujo's the one with real pace, and he might not play. If they are going to back three, I wonder if they try one of the left backs, either Oliveira or Viña, as the left-sided one, with the other playing as a wing-back.
I don't think you can play Coates and Godin in the back three at this point too.
No, that's the thing. So you've probably got to go Jimenez right, Coates middle, and then either Viña or Oliveira as the left-sided one, and then the other one of them as the left wing-back. The other question mark is who plays right-back/right wing-back. None of the options are great. Guillermo Varela is decent. And Jose Luis Rodriguez was the big surprise call-up to the squad. He's uncapped and one of only three home-based players, one being Luis Suarez, who's leaving Nacional. But, I think that's a good shout. I think they need Araujo to come back and look like himself for at least one of these group stage matches. They can probably muddle their way through if Coates plays one and they play a bit of a deeper block with him in one game and Godin in the other, and then get Araujo back. But the question then is who'll be next to Araujo, because Jimenez probably won't last 3 games. My defender, because I obviously couldn't pick Moises Caicedo at any point, so I had to get an Ecuadorian in. So I'm going for Piero Hincapié, who I absolutely adore. I think he is absolutely outstanding. Left side centre back, can also play left back, really comfortable on the ball, really comfortable carrying the ball into midfield. Does make some defensive mistakes, which you expect from a 20-year-old. But he's part of a trio of excellent young defenders there at Leverkusen. And I think his partnership on the left side of this Ecuador defence with Estupinan, I think is going to be vital for them in terms of ball progression and trying to cover for the mistakes of kind of lesser teammates, if we want.
Coming to a Brighton to you soon.
He's one to keep an eye on to come to the Premier League. He may well be the one that Spurs settle on to come in as their left-sided one in the 3, because Bastoni's probably out of reach. It's very unlikely that Dortmund would sell Schlotterbeck after a year, and Gvardiol, I think the price is just going to get too rich for Spurs. I think Hincapié would make a ton of sense, though, coming in as a Ben Davies plus with the potential to be absolutely, I think, top class.
Are you suggesting Longley is not the answer?
I'm suggesting if Clement Longley is the answer, you're asking completely the wrong question.
Who's the biggest surprise not to be in Deschamps' squad?
Yeah. Right, let's move on then to midfield. I'll go first. I've got a Uruguayan here. Now, he's unlikely to be first choice, but I do think he'll work his way into the team during the tournament, and I think he could make a big impact. And it's Manuel Ugarte of Sporting. As a defensive midfielder, I just think he's one of the best young defensive midfielders in the world. Super aggressive, but reads the game really well, times his challenges really well. He's someone I would have on quite a short list of people who can step in and potentially be a Fabinho successor or even replacement within 12 months. From the minute he arrived at Sporting, he just settled in really, really well, to the point where the title-winning midfield of Palhinha and Matheus Nunes that had dominated Portuguese football the previous season, he stepped in and was playing regularly over one of them. And this season, even in a team that's struggling, a Sporting team that is struggling, I think he's been excellent. So I think he could play a key role for them if given the opportunity. He's someone I'm very, very high on.
Yeah, I actually have limited view on Ugarte, but I have seen him a couple of times in either the big Portuguese games or the European games that they've played, and he does look very combative, very aggressive, and fairly safe with the ball, short passing wise. I'm not so sure about what I've seen from him in terms of long balls at the minute. That seems a little bit erratic, but like I say, it's a small sample size of what I have seen. But I do like the fact that he was basically spoken about by Amorim in terms of being an upgrade in certain areas over Palhinha. So I actually really like Palhinha. I think he's a really good defensive midfielder in terms of the basic stuff that he does, protecting the defence and the work ethic that he has and the positional work that he has and everything. So quite an interesting one for me to keep an eye on if he does get game time here for sure.
Who have you got then?
I have gone very close to home. I've gone for one who I think needs to play really, really well if his national team are to go as the distance, or the distance that people kind of expect of them. That's Jude Bellingham. So again, it's not an unexpected name in terms of, well, we'll watch him anyway, but it's the role in the team which I think is most important right now, because England have habitually been like Declan Rice, Calvin Phillips, Jordan Henderson. That's pretty much it for central midfield for a while now. And Bellingham is one of the ones who are obviously coming through and trying to win themselves a place in the team. Rice has played non-stop for the last 18 months. West Ham don't rotate. He plays all the time in all of their games which have any meaning whatsoever. And he's a lock to start for England, and he has to be. Henderson has been in atrocious form and is not completely fit. Calvin Phillips hasn't played at all because he's not completely fit, which means Jude Bellingham's going to start the tournament. If he plays well, one, he could be one of the best performers in the England team completely, full stop, across the entire World Cup. And two, he'll keep his place because he is someone who can make things happen. England have a real issue getting between the midfield line and beyond the forward line, I think. And Bellingham's one of the ones who could play that sort of connector role if they play the 3-4-3. Mount, I don't think it really suits him. And I think England really, really lacks someone who can join midfield to forward and get runners beyond as well. Bellingham is one of the very few players who can do that. I wouldn't be surprised to see him have a massive role at this World Cup.
I agree. I think he's going to be vital. I think you're right. I think for me, I've watched pretty much every West Ham game this year because I wanted to see Paqueta and Scamacca, and obviously there's been a lot of hype around Declan Rice, and I'm really left cold when I watch him because he just doesn't seem to have anything in his legs at the minute. Like, he'll have 15 to 20 minute bursts, and you think there's a real player there. He's certainly not a £100 million player, but he's a £60 million midfielder. And then he just completely sails through games and he gets dominated far too often. Now, a big part of it is he's playing in midfield with Thomas Souček, who's also exhausted. I mean, the two of them have been run into the ground by David Moyes because he's terrified to rotate, terrified to try new things. It's quite poor management from Moyes, and I wouldn't be surprised if Declan Rice has a bit of an underwhelming World Cup, but I do think Bellingham is one that could overwhelm. I think if he's given the opportunity, he will take it with both hands. And the thing for him as well is, if we look at this England team and we consider he's going to probably play a back three in every game, it's probably going to be Walker, Stones and Maguire. It's probably Trippier and Shaw as the fullbacks or wingbacks. It's almost certainly Kane and Sterling as two of the front three. And Rice will be in the team. Now, that leaves two positions. So the question here is, can Bellingham make one of them his own? I think the answer is yes. And then who's the other player? Because if it's a Foden or a Mount or a Saka, that means Bellingham is playing in a two. But I wouldn't put it past Gareth Southgate for Phillips to be that other player. And a Phillips-Rice pivot, which comes with its own issues. You mentioned Phillips hasn't played this season, 54 minutes in total, I believe. So that would make Bellingham the 10, potentially, behind the front two. And if he's played in that role with freedom, he could have an even bigger impact. Like, he could genuinely be a world beater in that role.
Yeah, if you just mentioned freedom in a Gareth Southgate system. Yeah,
but I'm talking about freedom from having to track runners. Yeah, that's exactly it. Not having to... Because Southgate's midfield two play in a box, and they're not really allowed to express themselves at all. But if Jude gets a chance to play a bit further forward, then potentially he could really be the impact England need. I just don't know if I trust Southgate to do it. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if Bellingham starts next to Rice, but by the time we get to the third group game, Bellingham's sitting on the bench and Calvin Phillips is playing, and it's Mount and Sterling either side of Harry Kane.
He'll be Trent in the group, and then he'll bring in the solid Trippier for the
for the important games. Yeah. Who's your midfielder, Guy?
I've cheated a bit and went for a winger, but I know you'll allow me when I say the name, Dave, and that is Matoma of Japan.
Yes,
who is the best player in the world at the minute. Yeah,
just like to say this is an outrage because I've picked Matoma in the right position, so now I can't use him.
Good.
You can. You can talk about him now afterwards.
Exactly. So shut up, Karl. He's just so much fun because nobody had ever heard of him before. He was at Brighton Belgian team, and he just came in, became a wing back, and then all of a sudden he was just basically a winger who was skinning 12 people at a time and then setting up goals for fun. So yeah, he's probably been one of the funnest players in the Premier League, and I think we all had Japan going through, didn't we? If they get through, him being fun part of that with Minamino, etc. I'm not overly familiar with the Japan squad, obviously, but it's the stage for him to almost announce himself even further than the Premier League. So yeah, I think that'll be fun.
I like it. I do. Karl, you've got Matoma then, so sell me on Matoma even further. I've already bought the farm with him. I've got all the stock. I'm fully invested. He might be the best player in the world. He's in outrageously good form for the national team this year, with 5 goals in 8 appearances, playing as a wide player. He's just sensational. And I think the balance of having most things run through Kubo on the other wing, and then him sort of as this, switch of play option, I think it works really well for them.
Yeah, Japan have such a fluid system, and it kind of looks some of the time as though it's a proper 4-4-2, and then you'll see them, and it's very much a 4-3-3. It really is fluid. Like I say, with Minamino especially plays one of those very, very fluid roles. I do think they have quite a lot of interchangeable players. So like Matoma might not actually start all the games, for example, but then he'll come on in one and maybe start the other 2, something like that. And the team will look very, very similar regardless in terms of their shape and their build-up play and everything. But Matoma, like you say, he's coming in brilliant form. It couldn't have been better timed for him in those terms. On the ball, really, really quick feet, very, very difficult to take the ball off. Good exchange of passes. Technically, first touch, I think, is absolutely superb from him. He's one of those players who can just take the ball on the turn, change direction, and not lose any kind of step or balance at all. I think he's a very, very exciting player to watch. They do have, like I say, quite a few interchangeable parts in that area of the team. You mentioned Kubo as another one. I'm actually now going to switch out Mitoma because, as I say, it's an absolute outrage to pick him in the wrong position. But that does give me the opportunity to choose somebody else who I was debating over for the next one. So Mitoma, fully on board with everybody watching him.
Yeah. As everybody knows, my love for Celtic is unabashed. And when Celtic were signing all the Japanese players, they did take a look at him and they got beaten to the punch by Brighton. And it was, somewhat heartbreaking for me. Well, it has become somewhat heartbreaking for me. I had no idea who he was beforehand, but having seen him play now, he'd have been a sensation in Scotland. Imagine him just dribbling past the big cloggers up in the Scottish Premiership. His ability in tight spaces, his willingness to take people on the byline, reminds me of Suarez. That ability to move the ball very quickly one way then the other and beat somebody where there doesn't appear to be any space is very Suarez-esque. There's nothing else about his game that's Suarez-esque other than the fact that he's the best player in the world. I'm fully on board. I absolutely adore this. And I really can't wait to watch this Japan team. There's just so many fun players in this Japan team. And, Daichi Kamada is another that people should just be keeping an eye on because he's almost Bobby-esque in a lot of the things he does, and I think he's one that people will really like. So if you haven't planned to watch Japan, I insist that you do. The only question mark I have over Japan is their goalkeeper, who's 40 soon. And you just, no, I'm not having it. Right, Karl, you can start then with your winger, because you've now had to change your winger. So who are you going for instead?
So my winger is an attacking midfielder now, and it's the one you just now mentioned as well. It's Daichi Kamada. I think he's an unbelievably good player. Another part of this Japan side who can rotate in or out of the starting lineup off the bench. He'll play left side. He'll play as an out-and-out number 10 in the times that they do play a 4-2-3-1. Particularly, I think, when he's behind one of the Celtic boys you were just referring to, Daisen Maeda. I think when he leads the line, it sort of lends itself a little bit more to having a number 10 because he's a lot more of a focal point. He'll run the channels. It leaves that central area free for a much more creative sort of player. Whereas I think some of the time, maybe if, say, I don't really know, there's so many of them to pick, but if Asano leads the line...
Asano's more of a box nine, isn't he?
Yeah, he'll probably be a little bit more better fed, let's say, if they play a 4-3-3 or similar in from out wide forward sort of thing. So Mitoma and maybe Kubo will play alongside him. So it really does depending on how they set up. But that, I think, is one of the few proper number 10s I would still consider for a team, because I'm not a massive fan in general of 10s. I think they're a little restrictive sometimes in terms of how the build-up needs to go through them and that. But Kamada's so hard-working. I like the fact you point out Firmino, a lot of the off-the-ball stuff he does is definitely that way, but also the link play that he has and then getting himself into the box. He's not a number 10 who will sit behind his forward. He will run beyond. He will get to the byline. He's happy to take people on. He'll switch out to the flanks. He's just non-stop. I absolutely love watching him. And I really, really hope he doesn't go to Portugal.
Yeah, same. He's like 4 players in one. He's a 10, but he's also an 8, but he's also a 9, and he's kind of a winger as well. He's just so well-rounded. Moriyasu, the Japanese coach, has done exceptional work since taking over in 2018. But I am outraged at the fact that Rio Hateta has not had more opportunities. He is phenomenally good for Celtic. Phenomenally good. And it's an outrage to me that Kyogo's not in the squad, because he's the 9 that should have been starting in this Japanese team. He's ridiculously good. Like, I know most people probably don't watch Celtic on a weekly basis, but you should, because Ange Ball is absolutely outrageously fun to watch. And with Kyogo and Maeda and Lyle Abada and Haksanovic, whose name I butchered, and Jota, they're ridiculous, but Kyogo stands out. Just his movement, his awareness, his ability to link play, his instincts in the box, they're all very, very good. I'd love to have seen him in this squad. Anyway, I will give you my winger next. I've got one, but I want to mention another one. So the one I've got is Jesper Lindstrom, who's Daichi Kamada's teammate at Eintracht Frankfurt, and he is just, I think he's magnificent to watch. I do. I think he's so much fun to watch. 22, can play in midfield as a 10 or as a winger. I like him as a winger. I like him cutting in field and getting involved, and he's just got really good goal-scoring instincts. He's got 8 and 22 already this season. He's really having a step-up season. Came through the Brøndby Academy, so I've seen him since he was there, because I was watching for, nostalgic purposes, because it's Danny Agger's club, and I saw him play there and thought this kid has something about him. And since he's stepped up to Eintracht and being more involved with the national team, I don't know if he's a nailed-on starter for the national team, because they've got some good options.
Who does he play for, Dave?
Eintracht Frankfurt in Denmark.
Yeah, okay.
They've got Skov Olsen, they've got Damsgaard, they've got Robert Skov, so they've got other players that might play ahead of him. But I think if he's given the opportunity, I think he will impress a lot of people. So I think Jesper Lindstrom's one for people to keep an eye on.
I think impact subs are going to play such a big role in this World Cup anyway. The fact that we've got more subs allowed, obviously, than last time we had a World Cup is just one part of it. The fact that
bigger squads.
Yeah, exactly, bigger squads, and the opportunity to make a sub at half-time without actually affecting how many subs you can make later on in terms of the breaks in play as well. These are all quite important things. For Lindstrom especially, I think probably you're looking at him starting as a sub, but an impact sub who can come off the bench and really impact things. I think especially with, say, Damsgaard, for example, who had won himself a place in the team, has not really been in good form or played too many minutes for Brentford, so maybe there's an opportunity sort of edges ahead of him with bright training. You'll look a little bit better, sharper, all the rest of it. If they stick with the 3-4-3, Eriksen's been playing that sort of narrow, wider forward as well, so you're not going to get in ahead of him, but depends how those games go as well, because if they do fall behind or they're struggling for a goal against, let's say Australia or whatever, then you're going to look for those more bright, inventive, good one-on-one sorts of players, people who can score a goal as well, obviously, and I do think that Lindstrom has that over some of those other attacking options, but people like Skov has quite a few set-piece goals, for example. Dolberg's not necessarily the most reliable goal scorer. Martin Braithwaite you probably don't bring on if you want a goal. You use him off the bench for other reasons.
The one concern with the Danes is the lack of goals in the squad. Like, Eriksen is their top scorer with 39 goals, nobody else in the squad has more than 11. Yusuf Poulsen and Dahlberg both have 11, and then Martin Braithwaite has 10. So they may well be looking for attacking output. Now, Andreas Skov Olsen is one that is showing real signs of Bruges this year, that he might be ready to step up. He obviously had, I suppose, a failed transfer to Bologna that didn't work out, but since going to Bruges, he's been really good. He's been great this season. So he might be one, like Lindstrom's the other. Those two could be real impact players for them. So I think they're going to be fun. The one I want to mention, though, and I've mentioned him already, he's the one player that I think for the England team, if it's not Calvin Phillips, who's that 11th player, I think it will be Mason Mount. I think he's likely to pick Mount over Foden or Saka, because I think he'll want the extra work rate in the team. Mount isn't a wide forward, and it's, I think, a massive waste of his talents. I think we're seeing it at Chelsea. He just doesn't suit the role. But I think this World Cup is really important for him because he's having a bad season. His place at Chelsea is probably coming under threat for multiple reasons. Number one, they look almost certain to get Christopher Nkunku. And if they sign Nkunku, you'd imagine it's Sterling and Nkunku in those two supporting roles, and they'll buy a number 9, which means there's no place for Mason Mount in the Chelsea team because he's not going to play in a double pivot. He's also got 18 months left on his contract, and apparently, according to the most recent reports, those negotiations have come to a complete standstill. So Mason Mount might be playing a little bit for his future here, or maybe for a move. And like I said, it is out of position, but I would absolutely take him at Liverpool. I think him as the right side at 8, or even a narrow right side in a midfield 4 in front of Trent, tucked in, playing in that half space, given license to attack the box off ball as we build the other side through Diaz and Robertson, with Trent's playmaking outside him. I think he would be outrageously good. But I think this is a big, big moment for Mason Mount, because we've seen players break into big Premier League teams, do really well, do well for England, and then fall off. And I'm thinking Dele Alli here. And I don't want Mason Mount to become the next Dele Alli. And if you remember, kind of the start of the Dele Alli drop-off was the last World Cup, when, if I'm not mistaken, he was about the same age as Mason Mount is now. Dele was 22 at the last World Cup, and I think Mason Mount might be 23. Yeah, he's 23, be 24. And that's where Dele's drop-off really began, was that last World Cup. And like, look at him now. He wasn't... You could have named 50 players for the England squad, and Dele wasn't going to be one of them. I don't think the same thing will happen to Mount. I think he's got maybe a bit more drive and a bit of a better kind of aptitude for the graft side of the game. But I do think this comes at a really important time for Mount. I think he needs a big tournament. Hello, I'm here to annoy you. I'm here to annoy you into listening to more of me and more of others on EPL Index. We don't just have the Anfield Index stuff. We've got EPL Index as well, which covers the entirety of the Premier League. And we have 3 podcasts and a whole bunch of really good writing on EPLindex.com. The podcasts are my own Two-Footed podcast, which is every day at 4 p.m, Monday through Friday, covering the whole league. We have A Tad Predictable, hosted by Tadiwa. You know Tadiwa, he does Anfield Index. He presents A Tad Predictable before every Premier League match week. And then Kevin De Vries and his crew on the EPL Roundtable, they're every week after the Premier League match week. So make sure you listen to everything we're doing on EPL Index and follow us there on Twitter at EPL Index. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, you mentioned could be 50. I think 55 were named. I'd be surprised if Dele Alli was one of them. So the drop-off is a concern for some, but I don't think Mount is that. I think not something that we see in terms of his game, his week-to-week performance level and everything. I mean, you can obviously go through bad patches as a player, but the type of player he is, like Firmino, for example, I don't think you would ever say that he would be not wanted by top sides just by pure work rate, even though we know that he can have on the ball some terrible, terrible games and even weeks at times. But the type of mentality that certain players obviously have, I think Mount probably does come into that category safely.
Yeah, and Dele Alli got slagged off by multiple managers now, whereas Mason Mount gets picked by every manager who's ever. So yeah, I think it'd be chalk and cheese in terms of attitude towards training and all that jazz.
Right, Karl, you've picked Daichi as your kind of winger kind of type player. So, Guy, who's your winger since you went for Mitoma as a midfielder, which Karl is still outraged at?
Central midfield. Karl can get in the bin. I've gone for Rafa Leao, which might be a bit boring. But
I love him, though.
Yeah, it's weird because obviously I think they call it MVP in Serie A. I think he got MVP or Player of the Year last year there. But I'm not a big watcher of the other leagues, to be honest, but when I see him in the Champions League and I don't want in the group stage, I want to see him do it on a bigger stage. And obviously I picked Portugal to get to the final in my prediction thing. So we mentioned the struggles with Cristiano. I think the lads either side of him may have to pick up the slack. And if I'm guessing Leao will be the one on the left, and Silva on the right, I presume. I think Leao may have to be the one who leads the front line for them. Yeah, it's weird because I think everyone expected him to have his breakout moment for Milan in the Champions League. Obviously, didn't go too well in the big games against Chelsea, but I think him probably leading the attack in terms of off ball and doing Ronaldo's running and stuff like that. I think this could be a breakout tournament, and yeah, that 23 maybe the next big forward to have his big stage.
He's another one that's been strongly linked to Chelsea as well, and obviously, again, that could have a huge impact on one Mason Mount. Karl, what do you think of Rafa Leao? Do you think, is he ready for the move to the Premier League, or would he be better served to stay with Milan for a bit longer and continue this upward trajectory of development that he's on?
I don't think another year or so at Milan would do him any harm at all, because they're obviously fighting for titles and everything at the minute. There is pressure and expectation. I think this season in terms of European football was maybe a little bit of a freebie almost because they achieved so much domestically last year. But with Napoli bringing the fight, let's say, and plenty of competitiveness in those not quite so good teams below them, I think it's not the worst thing for players who could be exceptional to learn quite early on what it means to have to be that consistent game after game after game, because if not, you're not winning things. So it's really good for them for Leao and the rest of his teammates, obviously, to have that sort of competition this year. If you want to defend your title, if you want to be the a iconic team of Italian football in this current era, you've got to do it again and again and again and again. And he's got a few players around him still, which I think are really good for him to lean on, like Giroud and the consistency that he's had. Obviously, Zlatan's still there in terms of what you can achieve across a long, long period of time. I think he's a brilliant player, like really, really good. He improved last year a lot, similar to, let's say, Vinicius Jr. in terms of his composure in the final third, picking the right decision, that kind of thing. But there are still times now, because I think he's become a bigger and more important player for them, when he does a little bit too much. When he's so capable of taking on three people and scoring or picking a pass at the end of it, that sometimes when he doesn't need to do that, now he is doing it. Like there were times last season in the title winning season when they had nobody else and it had to be him, and he did it and he came up big. And this year I think he's gone a little bit more the other way, which is all part of the learning stuff for young early 20s forwards. That's fine. But the quicker you get over that and sort of reach that next level of brilliant decision making time after time after time, that's when you're going to become one of the top Champions League players. So I think stay this year, maybe even next year again. It's the last year. I wouldn't want to see him stay at Milan if the Italian league as a whole hasn't improved beyond its current level past 24.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. Right, let's do strikers then. Guy, who have you got as your striker?
I have gone for Noah Okafor of the Swiss national team. I think everyone's sick of seeing Seferovic and Brillembolo, aren't they? It's been about 8 tournaments now. Obviously, Haris Seferovic is the best striker in the world in Karl's mind. from the Euros. But yeah, I think Okafor, I'm not sure if he's more of a wide forward, a 9, but if he can maybe add a bit more not shitness to the front line of Switzerland, it might be fun.
I mean, personally, in terms of the Swiss attackers, I'm just raging that Johan Valanten's not still involved. You know, I thought he was going to be like a 20-year international career guy when he came through. So it's very, very disappointing that Harris is still around and Johan is no longer a thing. Okafor, I think, is a really good shout. I think, again, look at the regeneration of the Swiss team over the last 2 tournaments sort of thing. I think they've done a fairly good job in terms of bringing a few new faces through. I think he's one who can probably elevate them to the levels that they hoped Briel Mbolo would do. Again, I think, like Mbolo, he's better, like you say, as a wide forward or a second forward. So maybe they still need to find the right balance in who actually leads the line or be the regular goal scorer. But if they can share the goals around the team, that's equally as good. So the more fast-paced attacking options, good one-on-ones, that kind of thing that they have is going to benefit the team. They are eventually also going to need somebody to take the ridiculous goal-scoring mantle off Xherdan Shaqiri. I think Okafor is not a bad shout for that. I look forward to seeing him, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, me too. I'm very much looking forward to seeing him. And he has, of course, been linked to Liverpool in recent days. And funnily enough, as we were podcasting, I got a text from Sam Maguire that just says that Okafor looks decent, because Sam is doing a bit of a deep dive on him for a Patreon piece, so keep an eye out for that. Karl, who's your forward player?
Right, so I've gone for players from teams who I think are going to reach at least the round of 16, and so similar to a couple of them that I've picked so far, I've gone for someone who really needs to have a good tournament if his nation are to get through, and I have predicted them to get through. And so that is a little bit less technical than some of the players that we have picked so far in this podcast, but no less important for the team. I have gone for 30-year-old Torquay-born Kiefer Moore of Wales.
The modern day Duncan Ferguson. He is the type of player who's likely to cause a bit of chaos at the World Cup because he's enormous for starters. And he's so aggressive in the way he attacks the ball. It's one of the reasons I think Mitrovic is going to have a good tournament. I like this shout. He's obviously got limitations to his game, but I actually do like this shout. Sell me more.
Right, so we look at Wales' fixture list, let's say, and if they want to go through, you've got to win one of the games, obviously. That's the first thing. And so they start against the USA. We've already talked about them at length. Defensively, they're going to have at least 2 new components in that goalkeeper, centre-back, back 3 conundrum, because Tim Ream is probably going to come in. They've not taken their first-choice goalkeeper, let's say. So there's going to be some changes there. Not 100% sure he starts that game. It could be like, a Brennan Johnson, Gareth Bale situation. So, but even off the bench, that's going to be a fairly tight match, I think. He's someone they will not necessarily never have seen that kind of player because, there's a good few big lumps in MLS, let me tell you. But he is a very, very aggressive player, will attack absolutely anything. Might be that he comes on late in the game when certain players are getting tired. Maybe a couple of the players who have not played all the minutes, let's say, get into that USA starting lineup, and they will struggle to keep a handle on him. Against Iran, I think he might well be just in the starting lineup, regardless of anything else, because that's the one you want to try and target and attack as much as possible. The Iranian centre-backs, well, I don't mind on the side so much, but on the centre-back line, I'm not necessarily sure that they are the most combative in the air all the time. I think that this is a match they might identify in as saying, you're probably going to get more yellow cards than goals across the tournament, but this is the match you have to get one of those goals in. So I'd be looking for him to get that game in particular. From a tactical point of view, whether he starts or comes off the bench, really, really focal point for them. Very, very important to their hopes of getting through.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're starting Brennan Johnson and you can bring on Kiefer Moore, it's just a completely different look for the defence to have to deal with. So I do think he could cause quite a few problems. I've gone for someone very young. I've gone for Youssoufa Moukoko, who's obviously been linked to Liverpool in recent days, which is part of why I've got him in here. But I just think with Timo Werner being out like you mentioned on the previous pod that Serge Gnabry probably seems like the likely one to replace him, but I just wonder if there's going to be opportunities for Moukoko to really show what he can do. He's powerful and bustly, but he's small and quick, and he's a really unique type of player. There's times he looks quite unrefined in what he does, but there's an explosive nature to his game that I think could have, because international football is that little bit slower, and I think especially against the likes of, against the Spanish centre-backs, neither Torres nor Laporte are the quickest in those first couple of yards. And I think someone like him, with his goal-scoring instincts, could really make an impact. He's obviously having a really good season for Dortmund. He's got 6 and 14 in the Bundesliga. He's got an outrageously good underage scoring record. He's just a natural goal scorer. And I do wonder if he might just get a chance. And if he does, I think he's one to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I mean, Germany as a whole, I kind of wanted to talk about a little bit more in depth than we got the chance to. But their attack, like you say, they could just play, let's say, Kai Havertz up front, right? And that's an established forward and all the rest of it. But you look at the group of attackers that they've ended up bringing. Niklas Füllkrug is the number 9 for them. He's never been capped. Yusuf Moukoko has been taken. He's never been capped. Karim Mediema is gone. He's got 4 caps. He's 20 years old. Hansi Flick has not sorted this attack out. There's absolutely 100% going to be opportunities there. I think Moukoko is still a bit Hail Mary sort of take with them, but the thing that I think might really work in his favour is the fact that over the last 2 years, really, with Dortmund, he has been so used to being called upon off the bench to impact games in very, very short spaces of time. Even at this season, obviously he's come into the starting lineup more over the last, month or so. But before that, it was again off the bench. He scored against Freiburg, off the bench. Scored against Schalke, off the bench. This is a quite ongoing trait that he's been able to show because he's been forced into the first team environment so young, obviously through injuries last year. There was obviously the Haaland thing last year as well. This year, it's a much more continual involvement, but still off the bench more often than not so far. So I think that does definitely play into his hands. I guess, let's say the first game or whatever, they might turn to Füllkrug off the bench first, or if Gnabry starts, then maybe Havertz comes off the bench. But at some point, you've got to assume that since Flick has taken all these very, very inexperienced attacking players, he thinks that in this game or in this situation, this is probably the kind of player I need to turn to. And Kai Havertz is not exactly in amazing confidence at the moment. His form has not been superb, so he could still be used deeper or wider or all the rest of it. There's lots of questions to be answered over this Germany squad, so I absolutely think Moukoko will get a chance. Yeah,
I mean, Havertz is not in good form. Adeyemi's not in particularly good form. Muller's not in good form. Gnabry is in good form for the first time in about 18 months. Füllkrug, like you said, he's never been capped. He's been outstanding for Bremen this season, like really, really good. But he's very limited in what he can do. And there's going to be a situation that arises where Germany need a goal, and Hansi's going to turn and look at his bench, and the best option might be the 17-year-old sitting there looking back at him. I mean, 6 goals and 6 assists this season in 1,200 minutes for Dortmund. It is largely coming off the bench. That's 22 appearances. 6 goals and 4 assists in 800 minutes in the Bundesliga. Sorry, less than 800 minutes in the Bundesliga. Like, he is used to impacting games in short bursts, and maybe that's all Germany need him to do, and maybe he can be a total Scalacci who, starts off on the bench and scores a couple of goals at the bench and works his way into the team. We'll see. I just think he's definitely, especially from a Liverpool point of view, one to keep an eye on. So that is all of our 5 players for the 5 positions. Let's quickly then do our 2 players from a purely Liverpool point of view that you haven't named, but that you think Liverpool should keep an eye on because they're positions of need or positions that might become of need. Karl, you start us off.
Okay, so I've gone for Jurien Timber of Ajax and Netherlands. I really like him as a player. I think he's technically really good, strong, quick, decent positional sense considering his age. I also, for a Liverpool perspective, really like the fact that he can play centre-back and right-back. I like Joe Gomez, I do, but he's obviously not in the best career moment because of the injuries and inconsistency and all the rest of it. I think we probably have to acknowledge we don't really want to rely on him as a right-back all the time anymore. But I do think that there will be a regeneration of a centre-back at this point. So, let's say in the summer or whatever, either Gomez or Matip are likely to move on. I still feel that might be the case. I think Timber is an absolutely perfect one to come in. He's not so old or so established that he has to play absolutely every single game. We're still talking about someone with fewer than 100 appearances to his name in terms of top flight matches. We are able to play him on the right side of defence as a partner for Van Dijk, who he is probably going to be on the right-hand side of for the national team, even if they play three anyway. And obviously he can be a more established and senior cover at right back for Trent as well. I know we've got Calvin Ramsey now, but I can imagine it's going to be a couple of years run up for him, and maybe he'll have to go out and get quite a lot of game time on loan or whatever. So this does give us that extra option anyway for an international caliber player to play right back at the same time as him being a regular option, either with, instead of Konate, whatever it is. We need the options. We've proven our centre back group cannot stay consistently fit. I think a change needs to happen there, and he's a great option for it.
I love him. And I would love to see Trent given the opportunity on the right side of a midfield four. A little bit deeper, a little bit tucked in, kind of the role I described from Mount earlier, but as more of a playmaking option than Mount, who'd be more of a goal-scoring option. And if I was doing that, Jurrien Timber would be my first choice to come in at right back, because I think he just locks down that position. I think he's probably too short to be a Klopp centre-back. Jurgen likes his centre-backs to be enormous, but he makes up for it with his pace and his strength. So he's definitely one that I'd be keeping a close eye on. Who's your second one?
I've been backwards and forwards about 700 times. I was trying to get a defensive one and an attacking one. I think I would still go for a slightly lower key attacker, because I quite like our group of five as they are at the minute. I don't think we'll add, another Darwin level of player in terms of ability or cost, but I think Yeremy Pino of Villarreal is at a club we could obviously sign a player from. Not going to cost the absolute earth. I think I'll have a quick check, but I think Pino's only got a couple of years left on his contract as well, unless he signed another.
He's going to Villa to reunite with Unai.
Oh, he did sign a new one. He has signed he signed the new one, and never mind the Unai Emery thing, because no player really wants to go and be managed by him twice anyway. So I think Yeremy Pino as a versatile outlet can play right the way across the attacking line. I think another Jota type in terms of a little bit style of play as well, but more in terms of we can use him in whichever role we want. An out-and-out winger, a number 9 who'll be working quite hard, an inside forward from obviously the left-hand side of the pitch. He makes quite a bit of sense to me. Still more development to come in his game, and I think he definitely needs that if he's going to be a level that we want to be back at. Now, at the minute, he'd probably be a starting 11 for us at the minute, let's be honest. But there's plenty to like in his game, and I think he's one who'll be an option off the bench and maybe start one of the games for Spain in the group stage. But he's capable of being quite explosive and having a good impact to turn matches around.
I like him. I do, and I think we do need to definitely add one in attack, regardless of what way we're going to play. I think we need to add one, and we might need to add 2 if Bobby leaves. So Yeremy Pino's definitely one to keep an eye on. Guy, who've you got then?
Well, I did have Mokoku, but you stole him, so
you can have him. You can.
How do you like it?
It's fine. I didn't whinge about it, Karl. I just cracked on in the background and found someone else. I picked Mohamed Kudus, who obviously was, well, I didn't watch both the Ajax games that we weren't playing against them, but he seemed to be their best player in the group stage of the Champions League. Obviously, you just mentioned Bobby potentially leaving there, Dave. Obviously, there is slight talk about a new contract, but obviously plays false 9 for Ajax, did used to play more in midfield, was linked to an Everton move, so there's a narrative there, so funny. We go back to Momo Sissoko days. So yeah, I think he could be a nice versatile squad option, either in the right centre mid attacking midfield role, or if we like this diamondy thing, maybe he could split between Moore and Darwin and Diaz on the left. And
we play left wing as well, so you could have him as a Diaz backup. You could have him as a Mo backup. You can obviously play through the middle. Can play as an 8. He's super versatile, super talented. It's amazing how close he came to making the worst move of his career and ended up playing for Frank Lampard. But he's been really good for Ajax this season. Karl, any thoughts on Mohamed Kudus?
Loads of thoughts on Mohamed Kudus. I love him. I'm not going to go over them all now because I've spoken about him so many times, but I would absolutely do anything to get him at Liverpool. Fantastic player.
And Guy, your second one?
Very boring, almost predictable, but I have actually seen a lot of this bloke, and he's obviously been linked with us, and that is Declan Rice. I think, obviously you mentioned he's been overplayed at West Ham, and I do agree. But for England, I think maybe with Sterling and Calvin Phillips, he's probably been England's best player under Gareth Southgate by quite a distance. Even though Harry Kane scores loads of tap-ins, I think Rice, Phillips and Sterling have probably been the 3 better ones. Probably the best player in the Euros for them. When he got subbed off against Italy, that's when Italy seemed to dominate the game with Cristante. So I think if he gets somewhat of a break at some point and he actually has something in his legs, I think Rice may be England's most important player. And if the links are true that we are interested in him, I think we could turn him into any 3 of the roles, maybe not the positional one with Thiago, but if we let him off his leash a bit, I think he could play the right-sided one. I think it'd maybe take a projecty type thing we did with Fabinho, but I think he could be his successor as well. But I think an off-the-leash Rice could be something really fun in our system.
I like Rice in a 2. I don't really like him in a 3 all that much. So in a 2... I if we were to move to the 4-4-2, I definitely do. I like the idea of Rice, as long as you put the right partner for him. So someone that can sit in and actually run the game and let Rice go box to box and be more kind of a roaming destroyer off the ball and also someone that gets in the box.
That's why I prefer him as like our right centre mid if we did stick to 4-3-3. I think that could... That
kind of the old Henderson role.
Yeah. I think that could...
Yeah, and he's got, he's got similar enough limitations to what Henderson has, but he's a better player. You've teed me up nicely with that comment about the Euro 2020 in 21 final when it was him subbed off and Henderson subbed on. That's where England lost all control in the game, and it's a nice narrative that I can run, but I won't go that far. Karl, any thoughts on Declan Rice for Liverpool?
No.
I love it.
He's still salty about Matoma. Sorry.
Right, I've got my 2. I've gone for a centre back because I agree. I think we're going to have to move on Joe or Joel, and Joe has more value, but then you're probably going to lose Joel for nothing when his contract runs out. But I'm probably okay with that. I really like Antonio Silva, the young Benfica centre-back. Now, he's not a guaranteed starter for Portugal by any stretch, but I do think there's a possibility that he ends up as the partner for Ruben Diaz because, Pepe is 1,000 and always likely to find a red card somewhere along the way. I think Silva he's everything Diaz is without the errors. Obviously, he's a younger player, so he does make young defender mistakes, but he's not as prone to lapses in concentration as Ruben Diaz is. He's got more pace than Diaz as well, but he's got that same aggression. He's a front-footed defender. And I could see him and Ibu as a long-term pairing working really nicely together. At his age, he's still young enough that you can convert him into a left-sided centre-back. So you could bring him in, have him learn behind Virgil, have him play alongside Virgil in some games, but with the view of this is the guy who replaces Virgil when the time comes. But in the meantime, he'll still play a whole lot. You'd have Virgil and Ibu with him as the 3rd and Matip as the 4th. I think he's absolutely sensational.
Do you think he'll play in this tournament? Because not on any of us have probably watched Benfica that much.
I think he might. I think when you look at the Portuguese centre-back group, it's kind of Ruben Diaz and question mark. Danilo Pereira is a holding midfielder who was converted into a centre-back, and for me, isn't a particularly good centre-back. He tends to forget that he's a centre-back and think he's still playing in midfield and go barreling out looking for the ball. Pepe is 39. He turns 40 in February. You're not going to play him in too many games. And the fourth one is Silva. He is uncapped. It may well just be that he's been brought for the experience of it, but I think if he's given the opportunity, he could nail down that spot. He's got very limited experience. Like, he's only played 18 games for Benfica, but there was a clamour for his call-up, and he's gotten in over, a couple of others that maybe people thought would be in the squad, like Inacio, who plays for Sporting. There's a really nice crop of young Portuguese centre-backs with Thiago Jallo, David Carmo, Inacio. There's the other one from Sporting who's been out on loan permanently, and whose name's fucking escaping me. But this kid is the pick of the crop. He's really, really good. And the second one is kind of a direct backup for Luis Diaz, who could also be a backup for Salah in the 4-3-3. I think, Karl, you'll probably have seen more of this kid than even I have. But Facundo Torres of Orlando, I really like watching him play. I think he's got a creativity and an impishness that I really, really like.
I just want to sign anybody who we can describe as impish, to be perfectly honest.
What country is he from? Just to keep
Uruguay.
Okay.
So, again, I think there's probably going to be question marks over, game time, but I think, goes back to the point that we made earlier, we're going to see a few more people who can make a little bit of an impact off the bench in games because A, that's their role, and B, we've got more subs, bigger squads, all the rest of it this year. So I think he's very, very fun to watch. That's the first thing. Level of performance, I'm not 100% sure yet because obviously, playing in MLS, it's a little bit difficult to judge how you would move across. First of all, I think it was a good move for him to make over to Orlando or to MLS anyway from Peñarol in the first place. I like the fact that he can play both sides. He's quite quick in that first 5 yards. I'm not sure I would say he's like lightning over a longer period of time, but he doesn't mind taking people on and a little bit, knocking them off the ball more than skill to get past in a similar sort of way to Diaz, I suppose, that you mentioned. Definitely want to watch. I'd be interested to see a bit more of him before I say what level of Premier League he could play in. But again, Uruguay, bit of a regeneration of the team, slowly happening, maybe not as quickly as everybody wanted it to, but he's only 22, he's already got a dozen caps, something like that probably, so I think we'll see a good bit of him, but again, it depends on the system that they play, because Uruguay are another one who have switched from sort of a back three and played two up front, in which case I wouldn't expect to see him during that game at all, unless they, again, are going to change systems later on, but if they're playing a bit more 4-3-3, 4-2-3-1, then yes, you can certainly see him along one of the sides or the other.
Yeah, I think so. He's also the main reason I've highlighted him is he's very close mates with Darwin. They came through the Peñarol system together. Darwin's a year older, but they were in the same age group for a number of years. I just think he's fun to watch. I really want to see him in this tournament. He's been linked with Arsenal of late. Do you know what I actually really like about him? Because we live in a time where everybody is obsessed with inverted players. So you've got inverted wingers have been going around for years and years. The first one I remember seeing was Andreas Limpar, but Paul Merson was there. And then it became very popular when Robert Pires was doing it for Arsenal. But what I like about him is he's a left-footed left winger. He doesn't want to be anything else. He doesn't want to go across and ball up and cut inside and shoot 8 times a game. He wants to be a left winger who beats his man and gets supply into the box. And I admire that. And can I also just say that we need to kill this idea of the inverted fullback just because they go narrow. That does not make them inverted. Cancelo is an inverted fullback because he's a right footer who plays left side and inverts in naturally. When Zinchenko does it, That's not an inverted fullback. That is just a fullback who moves high and narrow. So can we just kill the fucking nonsense that these tactical morons on Twitter have created about Trent is not an inverted fullback when he moves high and narrow. He's just a fullback who plays in that area.
If I ever see a left-footed right back, Dave, it's going on the 2 left-footed centre-back list.
I want to see it. I'm hoping we get to see an all left-footed. If what Luis Enrique needs to do in the first game is bring either whoever's not starting, either Alba or Gea, whoever's not starting needs to come on at some point at right back and give us a full left-footed array in there for Spain.
Malacia played right back the other day and it just haunted me. And he was dreadful.
He was, but he wasn't as bad as Martinez getting run by Dan James. Right, we will leave that one there then. So that's what we've got. We've got 5 players to watch and 2 players for Liverpool to watch each. So in total, we've given you 21 players to keep an eye on in this World Cup. Actually 22 if we count Mason Mount. So there we go. Karl, anything you want to add before we go?
No.
He's still salty over Matoma. Guy, anything you want to add before we go?
I'm still happy over Matoma.
Yeah, but you're salty over Makokos. That's fine.
That's true.
I'm just happy. So there we go. Right, we will see you next time. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this Anfield Index show. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel so future podcasts find their way to your device automatically. There's nothing quite like fan engagement, and we'd love to know what you think of anything discussed on this show. The best way to get in touch is over on our free Discord community, where both podcasters and listeners debate the hottest LFC topics 24/7. Sign up free now at AnfieldIndex.com/Discord. You won't regret it. You can also follow us on Twitter at Anfield Index and find us on Facebook by searching for Anfield Index. Oh, and before you go, we'd love it if you could leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast app. It only takes a couple of seconds, and it means the world to the people who create these free shows.